Hi, this is Kelly Fordon, and I'm here today with Erika Krouse and Caitlin Horrocks. Before I introduce them to you, I wanted to remind you that Let's Deconstruct a Story is a listener-supported podcast. We're available on Substack, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and we would really appreciate any support. If you love this podcast, you can subscribe, you can donate. It costs money to have everything edited, and any small donation makes a big difference. So as I said, today I have Erika Krouse and Caitlin Horrocks. We are talking about a story from Erika's collection, Save Me Stranger, because Caitlin posted about this story on Facebook and said it was just the greatest book she'd read in a long time. And so I immediately picked it up, and then I read it, and I felt the same way about it. So that's what instigated this. And then when I was talking to Erika, she said, "Oh my God, I'm a huge fan of Caitlin Horrocks. Can we please read a story of hers as well?" So we're going to do 2 stories today. I've posted them on my Substack, so you should read them ahead of time for sure, because this interview is full of spoilers. One is Jude by Erika Krouse, and the second story is Better Not Tell You Now by Caitlin Horrocks. They're both available online for free. Erika Krouse is a writer of fiction and nonfiction. Her newest short story collection, Save Me Stranger, was published by Flatiron Books and was hailed as a dozen little masterpieces by Adam Johnson, Remarkable by Ann Beatty, and Louise Erdrich said, "Read these stories with a buddy because someone will have to scrape you off the floor." And it is so true. That's exactly how I felt about it. Author of Tell Me Everything, the story of a private investigation, which, by the way, I went on to read after I read this collection, and it's just unbelievably good. That was published in March 2022 by Flatiron Books. It was a winner of the 2023 Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime, the Colorado Book Award for Creative Nonfiction, and the Housatonic Book Award for Nonfiction. I could go on and on with this bio. She's just so accomplished. So I'm going to go on and read Caitlin's bio, which is just incredible as well. Caitlin Horrocks is the author of the short story collections Life Among the Terranauts and This Is Not Your City, both New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice selections. Her novel, The Vexations, was named one of the 10 best books of 2019 by the Wall Street Journal. Her stories and essays appear in The New Yorker, The Best American Short Story, Penn O. Henry, you name it. She also went to Kenyon like I did, so I love that. She lives in Michigan like I do, so it's really fun to talk to another Michigander. And without any further ado, here are Erika Krouse and Caitlin Horrocks. How are you?
There I am. Hi.
How's it going? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Caitlin!
All right. I am so excited to get started talking about this story with Caitlin, and I are going to be asking Erika some questions. And we thought we would start off with just Caitlin asking first, and then I'll go from there. We'll just be really casual with it. So
Sure. All right. So I don't think there's a way to talk about this story without spoilers here. Spoiler alert for this very first question. If you haven't read it, stop now, go read it. Because there is a wonderful, amazing mystery throughout this story about, of course, the grandmother's original name. And then we find out at the very end that our narrator has been carrying that name for her entire life. Erika, I assume you must have known pretty early on that was where this was headed, that maybe that was the origin of the story.
Actually, no. I mean, for me, sometimes I find out the end as I go. I always think I know the end, but then I really don't know and I change it. And it becomes sort of like a duh thing, like, oh, of course that's her name. You know what I mean? Of course this twist happened or whatever, because I feel like you have to sort of write into that blind faith a little bit of that your inner self knows what you're doing, even though your outer self has no clue what you're doing and very much knows that. But that story was actually based off of my grandmother, my own grandmother, who she actually buried two husbands and raised two children who were fully middle-aged before they knew either her age or her name. And I was always fascinated with that. Like, why did she do that? And what's that about? And she, of course, had generational trauma from, being from an immigrant family and, and escaping the Holocaust. So I think there was, and also she's a woman in, the early part of the 20th century. So she didn't have any power. And this was one of the only ways she could have power, is by keeping these secrets that no one, people might have wanted to know those things, but no one really cared a whole lot about her, really, enough to know. Of course, when they found out they didn't know, they were outraged and shocked and upset. But but there was this like kind of clinging to this power, and I wondered what the origin was. And then from there, I took other stories of other people's grandmothers and grandfathers and pushed it all together into one story. Because if you're going to write about, being Jewish, going through the Holocaust, you really have to say everything in one story. You can't have one Holocaust story here and another one over there and another one over there. It's just too much for people. It would be too much for me, probably.
So it's so interesting. This wasn't the question that I had lined up, but it just comes to me from that question, is that when you take a kernel of real life and use that as the spark for a story, you almost have to write into it more, and describe things more and be willing to veer off into fiction in the descriptions. And I'm just curious about that process with this story, because it feels so fully realized. It's so real. And you just mentioned that you took snippets from other people's stories. So I'm just curious what the process was moving from reality to fiction.
Yeah, I mean, autofiction is something that I've always been kind of interested in. I went to graduate school at University of Colorado, and I studied under the short story writer Lucia Berlin. And she was writing autofiction before people really called it that, or before it was really a thing. And I was always fascinated by her process of using her own life. I usually don't. I usually research and use other people's lives, other people's stories, because I'm actually not that interesting. Other people are, so that's more where my autofiction kind of comes in, using perhaps a family member or a friend or a story that someone else told me. For example, in that story when the everyone's sitting around that table and they were all camp survivors and they were wearing short sleeves, and there was that kind of like spokes of numbers from the arms. That was a story that my friend and real estate agent told me, and it always just stuck with me, how that was his his grandfather's experience. So I don't know. I think writers and maybe Caitlin, you feel the same way. I think we're kind of like crows, right? We just sort of gather stuff. And in fact, I'd love to know what kind of stuff you gather. What kinds of things stick with you?
I definitely a fellow crow or magpie. And I mean, I know we're focusing on this one story, but to put in a plug for the rest of the collection, Save Me Stranger, I think that's something you do so well over and over, is just drawing from all kinds of different lives and different sources. And yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I try to do as well. I don't feel that my own life is sufficiently interesting to mine very deeply or consistently for fiction. So yeah, always looking outside, myself or my own experience. Or for me as a writer, I think I'm writing to understand those other experiences. So I don't want to write the thing that I already understand. Not that we always understand ourselves, but interested in venturing farther afield.
And can I interrupt and just ask Kelly the same question?
Yeah, please.
Kelly's a writer, so I want to know what kinds of things you collect. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
hijacking.
No, it's good. Well, it reminds me of an experience. Like, I don't know if you've done this, but in my first collection of novel and stories, I placed a lot of the stories in places I had been, and even, had the same number of people. Like, say I'm on a vacation and there were 3 people on the vacation, and I'd gone on a vacation with 3 people. And have you had the experience of people saying, "Wait, we were there. I remember being," and that literally, I've heard Jeffrey Eugenides say that he set Middlesex in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, because he knew it so well, and the story itself, it was going to be such a leap of imagination to follow that character, his main character. So he wanted everything else to be easy. So he set it somewhere he knew really well. Among people, I think they were all Greek immigrants, that he knew that storyline really well too. So I thought, that's cool. Give yourself a break. Yeah.
As long as you don't get in trouble.
Exactly. Like, you do have to change, right? You need to change the people. I wanted to ask about structure a little bit, because you structure, each piece has the subheadings from the Holocaust, from some of the names that some of the interactions with the Nazis and some of the names that Jewish people were called. And I'm just wondering how that came to you as a motif.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, at first I just blurt things out in a big hot vomit of garbage, and then I try to figure out what's the shape of this story. And that story was different for me because I teach at a 2-year book writing program called the Book Project in Denver. It's called through Lighthouse Writers Workshop, and we have these intensives, and we bring in writers from all over the place, and they teach workshops. So the wonderful thing about that is I get continuing education. And Harrison Fletcher is a writer who was a visiting presenter once, and he taught a class on nonlinear narratives. And I'm usually very linear. Here's the beginning of the story, here's the middle, here's the end. And I thought about, and he had us all do it. And these exercises, you're like, yeah, I know that exercise, but unless you actually do it, it doesn't really help you at all. So, it was silent. There was nothing to do with this exercise. And I started, and I think he had us writing a numbered story. So I started writing the story, and all this stuff came out that I didn't realize I had to say. I'm really interested in the number 4 because I have a lot of cultural influences. On my mother's side is French and Indigenous, and there 4 is everything good. And I also grew up a lot in Japan, and in Asia, 4 means death because of some like homonyms and things like that. So like if you live on the 4th floor of a apartment building, it might be the 5th floor because they'll skip it in the elevator, right? The way in American elevators, they'll skip 13 sometimes. So I was, so I'm just really interested in that interplay of that 4, and also with my my grandmother, she took on this other name that others had given her. And also during the Holocaust in Poland, they were Russian, moved to Poland, were shoved over to Poland. And then they were called all these names and given all these labels by German Nazis. And so their identity was changed into these other things that in a language they didn't even speak. And I was just really interested in this sort of this naming convention and how it was. There's such a difference between being your own name and being a name that others give you and you don't really have a lot of say over, and how people sometimes adopt those names. So I was playing with that, and the four and the, it's either Jude or Yuda, depending on what language, and the Jude, and how all those words that I used for the titles, they mean different things that are completely horrible to Jews, right? That, they're anti-Semitic. So I don't know. I was just playing with those 4 ideas, and that gave me, I guess, permission to jump around in time, to break the rules, to try on different identities for each section of the story, and seeing how they added up together when I didn't come about it in a straightforward way. Long-winded answer.
So there are 4 sections, 4 letters in Jude. Yeah. Were there any other 4s that we didn't catch? in there?
Oh, probably not, but maybe.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
who knows?
Right.
That's smart,
Embedded in
Kelly.
there. Okay, I'll look after. Okay.
Let me know.
Okay. Now I am definitely looking for them. Okay. Do you want to go, Caitlin?
Sure. I just following on, I guess, with the structure and the headings. I especially when I got to number 4, which the heading is like Endlösung. So final solution, and I did. We've had the riddle throughout the story of the grandmother's name, and it seemed like a very audacious section header there, because I was like, well, okay, this is probably going to be the solution to kind of the story's riddle, but it's also, I mean, it's hard to think of something that is conceptually bigger or more final or more horrific. And I think it was representative of something that for me the story was doing so masterfully, is taking something that is just so beyond any individual's experience or capacity to describe, and really making it embodied in the grandmother and in this legacy that has now been passed down through her son and her granddaughter. And that the huge scale and the intimate scale, I think, works so powerfully here.
Well, thank you. I mean, you're right. Audacious. Like, I was like, who am I to write this story? You know what I mean? Who am I to write a story about the Holocaust? My God. It's I don't know if you guys feel this way, but sometimes you're writing a story and you're like, I really shouldn't be doing this. Like, I'm being bad right now. I'm writing something to which I cannot speak. I can't really do it justice, especially in a short story.
Well, I think that's so amazing that you say that, because I've never seen so many disparate stories pulled off so well in a collection. I mean, you are all over.
Except for this one.
No.
Caitlin.
Okay, yes. Yes. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, recently in the last 6 months. but it's just wild how you're in Japan, you're in Thailand, you're in, I don't know, Idaho. And then, I think we were talking about this before, weren't we, Caitlin? Like, just, it's incredible. I think I'm jumping in here. Maybe I'm out of turn, but
well, no, I mean, I did this. I ended up doing that like more of a comment than a question thing. But
yeah, go ahead.
I will take this to a question.
Okay, thank you.
Which is, when you do hit those moments of like, ooh, this story is scaring me, or I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I should do this. How do you write through that moment? Where, yeah, I guess what do you do when you encounter moments like that?
Yeah, I think I have a few things in my favor. One is that I'm pretty convinced I'm going to die at any moment. Like, that's just a part of my overall. I've always felt that way, and there are reasons for that. Yeah, I have to pay someone $150 an hour to, talk about. And another thing is, I really don't believe anyone's going to read anything that I write. And that's from I think we all kind of come up that way as a writer. Like, please, will you read my short story? What is a short story? Funny you ask. It's, like you're having to do all this sort of negotiation to get anyone to read anything. So there's a bit of, and I think another thing is, like, I'm an Aries, so it's like ready, fire, aim. You don't really think about things before you make huge decisions about everything. So those 3 things help me a lot, I think, in not necessarily in life, but in those choices of writing, of trying something that I don't know how to do. I really don't like doing the same thing twice. Even if I have to drive the same route 2 days in a row, I feel this like fog of depression. And like, why am I alive? It doesn't really, it's like I'm almost allergic. So with all those things kind of put together, it creates this need to seek out the novel. But I am willing to do the research. Some of the stories in my collection, one of the stories I researched for 10 years. That's longer than most people research a novel. And I'll do it, because I'm interested in it. So I think if you're willing to do the work for that, then you might as well take the risks for it.
Which story was that? I was curious. The 10
year. That's the first story, called The Pole of Cold, which is set in Oymyakon, Siberia, the coldest town on Earth. And
yeah. Oh my God. So, and also you've lived all over the world, so that helps too, right? So you lived in Japan and
I lived in Japan.
and you've been to Thailand.
Been to Thailand, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Actually, been to Thailand 5 times, actually. Yeah, 4 times in the 80s and once, and we actually got married in Thailand. So,
oh wow,
yeah.
Well, it reminds me, like Lee Newman was on here talking about her story, an extravaganza in 2 acts, and she said the same thing, that she challenges herself to do a cartwheel and then a round off, and then so she gets bored if she writes the same kind of story. So she has like a historical story, and then I don't even know what the other parameters are, but
She's
I thought,
good too.
What a great way to think about it, though, to challenge yourself. And then you said something about challenging yourself to write all stories that were about a stranger saving, like Save Me Stranger was like they're all strangers saving someone in different ways.
Or being saved.
Or being saved, yeah.
Stranger. Also, sometimes someone's a stranger to you, but they're not a stranger. And then I wanted to play with all of the ideas, about that. And it's a kind of specific idea, but it's one that, I don't know, I just got really interested in it. And I don't know if you guys do you guys just find yourselves obsessing and you don't know why? And it's so specific, the thing you're obsessing about. And I don't know. It just prevents me from doom scrolling in the age of Trump, maybe.
Well, I was gonna say, were you inspired by did you have to set yourself some sort of goal like that to remain inspired during this terrible time?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I have to escape. Realities. What's that quote you have? You must stay drunk on writing so reality doesn't consume you. Who wrote that?
I don't know, but I love that.
I think it was Ray Bradbury, actually. I think that was Ray Bradbury or somebody. Someone you wouldn't expect. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I have to I have to be reading and writing and teaching, and I can't get there, or it will eat me alive. And there's a point where I think you have to sort of decide how you're going to be in the world. The more I consume, whether it's news or things, books accepted, but everything else, the more I take in, the more I feel myself degrading, and the more I make stuff, the more I feel myself growing. So I've just decided to embrace the really weird part of myself that just has to always be like making a thing, whatever it is, instead of you can get sucked in just taking in a little bit too much.
Yeah.
I think writers
absorbing too much of that energy is really toxic. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys feel that you're more porous than other people?
I don't know. I will say I did look it up, and it is Ray Bradbury, and it's you must stay drunk on writing so reality cannot destroy you.
Oh.
From Zen and the Art of Writing. So you nailed it.
I got the verb wrong.
I don't know. I think probably the real answer is yes, but I have trouble owning that because there's something about it that seems like, oh, my precious artistic temperament or something. But yeah, anyone who spends any significant amount of time writing fiction is engaged in a lot of just paying attention in a very deep way that you can't always shut off to the people around you and what's going on. And for me, it sounds like you've done a really good job. Sort of setting aside some of your energy towards creation and not just consumption of doom. And I've had a very hard time kind of switching modes. I can doom scroll a lot to my detriment. Kelly, I don't know where you are on this.
It's the same, and I write poetry too, so I found that I've just been writing poetry for at least 3 years because that I hone in more on a feeling rather than a narrative, and I feel like I've lost the plot. And I think what you said just helped me a lot, Erika, because I think I need to just stop doom scrolling and re-enter and get some of that magic back. But I've lost a lot of my sense of humor, and I like to write funny, stories with a little bit of humor in them. I just can't get there right now. So maybe if I take your advice, I'll get back to it.
Oh, no, please don't do it. No one should model themselves after me. I'm just going to say, like, I'm not a good role model for anything.
Wow.
But I do think, that like more edgy sense of humor can help right now because life is just so ludicrous.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that can help you a lot, I think, actually. Okay, I want to ask you just a few specifics because I'm actually at a writer's retreat and a couple of the writers asked me some questions for you just specifically on this story. So is there a significance to the burgundy that she's all of her garments that she's sewn are burgundy? Is there a significance to that? Someone asked.
Someone at your retreat read my story?
Oh, they all read it. Well, there are only two. There's only three of us. But
3 of 3?
3 out of 3. Yes, they read it.
Do I know them? I must.
Doreen O'Brien. Well, they're both Michigan writers, Doreen O'Brien and Laura Thomas. Laura Thomas works at Michigan. Doreen teaches at Center for Creative Studies in Detroit. So
that's amazing. Well, tell them thank you for reading my janky little
gosh.
stories. Let's see. Did you make them? You made them, right?
No, I did not. No, I promise you I did not. I just said I'm interviewing, and they both were just blown away by the story, honestly.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, normally I get ignored,
We all get ignored.
Yeah, I know.
So you asked about burgundy, the significance of burgundy, and that was my grandmother, right? She would just pretty much strip to show me how she matched that day. But burgundy is such an interesting color in general. It's kind of what blood looks like when it's a little more dry, and it's the color of wine. It's the color of forgetting and also the lush life. But that's in contrast to what my grandmother was and what and what this character was, which is extremely poor because, after the war, it was hard. It was hard for people to live, and there were very few places that people could live, and very few jobs that people could get. So that's more, and I like that with the contrast to the gray, which was pretty much her overall personality.
Right.
This
which
like
is such
gray,
a bummer. Yeah.
gray woolen, like this damper on everything, which fascinated me.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Caitlin.
Sure. Endings. I will say I too never know the endings when I start. But for some reason for this story, because the ending does just slot so perfectly into place, I just assumed you had known it earlier. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about the reveal of information is so amazingly paced in this story. And that process of, okay, once you did realize the end, where did you kind of plant those seeds and manage that reveal?
And
right. So
I was just going to say, as you're answering that, I wanted to insert that part about the grandfather and is it Sunder Commando? How do you say? I don't know how to say.
I think it's Zonder Commando.
Okay. I don't either. My son does, and he's going to be mad now. Yeah, if you could just say, did you insert some things to heighten the tension in the story?
Yeah. So usually the way I write a story, this is the only thing that I do, have as a routine, which is I write the beginning and I write the ending. And I did this with this, but it changed. Like I had that as I wrote it, and then so I adjust. And then once I have the ending, then I go back and I reverse engineer how to earn out that ending. Because usually I think about it like you're on a road trip and you start out in wherever, Topeka, and then you want to go as far as you can, you want to end up in Juneau, Alaska. And then and then you think, well, that's so far. How am I going to get there? Where am I going to stop? Where am I going to change directions, et cetera? So that's sort of where, once I finally kind of have an ending that I really like. And I think the reason I didn't have the ending for this one when I started out was because I did this other process that Harrison Fletcher had sort of imposed on us. You're going to do this numbered story, 1, 2, 3, just see how many numbers you get or whatever. But usually I do kind of know. And and again, it changes. So I do have to go back and decide. But before I do that, I have to know what the point is. Like, what's the point of the story? What am I trying to say? What am I trying to explore? What has not yet been said in the way, I mean, like, especially with bigger topics, it is really hard to figure out what you have to say that no one else has said, maybe, in that way. And it'll be something specific. So that kind of narrows things down. And then I sort of figure out what has to be thrown away and what has to be added and where things are flat. And I try to follow the emotional trajectory of the story. What are the feelings of not just the characters, but what do I want my reader to feel across the story? And then I get lost and I drink a lot and then I cry. And then by the end, something happens on the page. It's never quite what I hoped, yet it's also more than I hoped in some ways. So that's kind of how I do endings. And Caitlin, I'm gonna ask you about. I have a question for you with endings, so I'm gonna save that. But Kelly, how do you do your endings?
Oh, all right. Well, I don't want to get because we're so tight on time, and I don't have a specific. I feel like I just fumble around for a long time, send things in. So, see, you guys are so accomplished. But what I do is like think I'm done, send it off. It gets rejected and it comes back. And then I'm like, what's wrong with it? And then I'll go again and again. And luckily I'll get rejected enough that it'll turn into a good story.
Oh, Kelly, that's everybody. That's everybody.
You think
always
so?
getting rejected.
Really?
Yeah. Like,
Wow.
I keep track. I have a spreadsheet because I'm a dork. And even after writing story, I started when I was 19 and now I'm 103. So and even now after 80 years of writing,
And then New Yorker and all that.
I still I think my percentage is 20%, which is I'm proud of that. I've worked my way
That's really, yeah. I mean, and for people who don't know, that's really good.
That's really good. But
yeah.
that's still 4 rejections for every acceptance, and
I
that is our
know.
reality even after. And I've sent
That's incredible.
thousands of things, Kelly. So please don't think that like any of us are just writing our brilliance, sending it off. And
yeah, I talked to Christy Hodgen. Do you guys know her yet? Do you know her work? Okay, she's very, very, I don't know if she's introverted, but she does not self-promote. And Elegies for the Brokenhearted was published in 2010. She teaches at Missouri. She's a great, phenomenal writer. She's won all these awards. And she was saying that she hardly ever gets published now because her stories are so long. And, there's only a few magazines that'll take long stories. Back to us, though, because I'm worried about the time. Okay. I know that we're going to move on to Caitlin, and let me just make sure we didn't miss anything. The photographs, she doesn't have any photographs of the Gentile family members. And then she herself is not technically Jewish, but she's Jewish enough to be, in Auschwitz. So those are all real ironies throughout the story. And it shows how arbitrary, prejudices and discrimination and bigotry. And it was so subtle as well. Was that one of the themes you were thinking about as you were writing it? All of those tiny and large ironies in life where we find ourselves and how people treat us.
Yeah, I think on both sides of my family, I belong to cultures that I belong to them, but I also don't. The cultures themselves, some people in them would not claim me, right? So I've always kind of felt like an outsider, yet these things are of me. And also sometimes being claimed by these cultures means being persecuted as well. So I've grown up with this awareness of genocide and bigotry and hatred from this strange internal place and never really known what to do with those things, because for me they are arbitrary. Why hate these people and not those people? Why hate anyone really? It doesn't make any sense.
And it keeps shifting.
Keeps shifting. And Kelly, I know this will air later, but we're taping this 3 days after in my hometown, where I live, there was a terror attack on Jews downtown. And it's so senseless. And then people try to attach sense to it. They're like, oh, it's because of these things that are happening thousands and thousands of miles away. And I'm like, well, yes, but
it makes no sense. It doesn't
make sense to attack a whole bunch of old ladies. Like, what's that helping? What's it helping? So I've never really understood this killing of people, for no real reason. But I've grown up with not understanding it. So it's that not understanding piece is also part of my value system and my core identity in a really weird way. I don't think I'm expressing myself very well.
No, you are. And then I was thinking that, you mentioned that in the story that other kids or the narrator's age are thinking about the now, and the narrator is forced to think about genocide and all of these things because there's this living reminder of what can happen to a person right there in the room with her. And it would be impossible to ignore that, even if she weren't imparting her name.
And that generational trauma really impacts everybody in the family. I know it impacted, my father. It impacted me. I'm sure, it just goes on. Really, whenever there are these unspeakable traumas and unspeakable horrors, they come out in all these ways because to speak them doesn't help. I mean, it helps a little,
But it doesn't, you're right, it doesn't help. Like, that's a really interesting facet anyway.
But we still try. That's our only tool. And for me, writing is a form of speaking, right? So I'm trying, and I feel like I come to the end of the story, I'm like, well, shit, I didn't solve the Holocaust.
Right. Why did I do that? No.
What did I do?
But I think, I don't know, Caitlin, I think you should have something great to say here.
Well, I have another question, which is the powers and limitations of language and sense and senselessness. I've been thinking a lot about the relationship of this story to your epigraph for the collection, which is, stories are the only enchantment possible, for when we begin to see our suffering as a story, we are saved. And Anais Nin. Is that true for these characters in this particular story? I mean, I feel them trying to make stories, but both the grandmother and the granddaughter, and they're very separate stories, and the granddaughter is missing a sort of key piece of information here. But yeah, thinking about the ways in which story making does and maybe can't save them in this particular story.
It can't say, well, depends on what you think of as being saved. And that's something I tried to explore, because I think, like, there's one story, I think being saved for one of the characters means being called out and punished. You know what I mean? Even if he doesn't ever accept that, it's saving other people from him. So, and also there's this thing that happens. So this was really true for me when I wrote my memoir, where it's, I think when you have some kind of a traumatic event or past or whatever, it's sort of lodged in a certain place in your brain. And whenever you think of it, you go to that place, right? You go to the place of trauma. But whenever you, again, going back to that idea of making things, when you make something out of that trauma, then the closest association for you becomes the making, right? The transformation, the altering of forms from trauma to art, which is, and the trauma itself is passive, it is negative, it is hurtful, it is, horrible. Whereas the making is, you have agency, it's active, it's something you're doing, and it is something that theoretically, if anyone reads our stuff, is for the good, right? So instead of your brain going to that horrible place, it goes to the better place. It kind of triangulates in this different way. And it might still go to the bad place, but again, the easier route is to that making piece. So that's what I do believe. I really believe that writing does save the writer's life sometimes. Not always, there's a long history of writers going a different way. But who knows? Maybe the writing kept them with us longer, right? And sometimes that can be true also of reading, because when you read, you're making a new reality in your head. You're creating a world. You're not, it's a passive sort of thing, but it's also an active imaginatory. Is that a word? Imaginatory? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It is now.
It is now imaginatory thing to do. Say it with assertion. Right? So then you are creating a new space for those feelings to live, and they kind of stay there sometimes. So I really do believe in that quote, and I wish I had said it, but she did, so that's why I quoted her.
That is so great. I love that.
Thanks. I hope it's true.
I mean, it feels true. I'm going to live it now. We're going to move on to Caitlin's story, Better Not Tell You Now. And remember, everybody, read it beforehand because we are going to spoil it as we talk about the ending. If you want to start, Erika, and then I'll just go back and forth.
Sure. So, Caitlin, you've done the impossible, which is published not just one, but two short story collections. And if people don't know how impossible that is, it's the unicorn. It's very hard. I had to practically trick my publisher into doing it, but you've done it, I think, legitimately. But I don't know if this is true for you, but sometimes when you publish one collection, you're like, best I can do, right? And then time goes on, and then you publish the next one, and it's a new best. And it's very different. And you can see how you've changed as a writer between the first collection and the second. And I was wondering, how have you changed as a writer, putting together Life Among the Terranauts? And I'm sure it was over a long time that you wrote these stories, but I wonder if you can tell me about your evolution as a writer a little bit.
Sure. I was at a conference a few days ago where, the people had books for sale, and somebody had just been like, which one should I buy? Like, which is the better book? Like, I felt like great question. Thank you for being interested in any of them. But I'm kind of the wrong person to ask. Because I sort of thought about them, and they're both my children. I'm not going to tell you which one's uglier. But I also, I had this moment where it felt like I should be able to look at the newer book and say, oh yes, that's clearly the better book. This is clearly me. I've evolved as a writer. Here I am with my heightened powers. And they do just feel different. I mean, there's and partly Life Among the Terranauts did come together over a very long period of time. So the oldest stories in that book were written around the same time as the stories in the first book. And then some of them were written as a sort of purposeful attempt to do things that I noticed I hadn't done in the first book. So I mean there was sort of progression that way. But I think they're both of a piece. That for me as a story writer, it sounds like maybe similar to you. I love the cartwheel, round off, let me try this move that I haven't perfected, or I think this could work. Let's find out. I haven't done a story that does this. Let's see how it goes. And I think that's always motivated me, and I think that motivated a lot of the stories across both collections. I think there is more of an emphasis. A lot of the protagonists in the first set of stories, they were very lonely. They were trying to sort of figure out who they were and where they were and what they wanted. And those people are also in the second collection. And those people are also me. But I think in the second collection, I was also trying to write more about groups and communities and people sort of, we don't forge our own identities in a vacuum. I mean, we do it through other people and where we are and when we are, and trying to get that to show up in the stories more.
So just as a follow-up, what brought you to that community piece? What made you want to explore that a little bit more, as opposed to the people in isolation and this is their story?
I'm trying to remember more specifically. I think I had a lot of protagonists in the first book are people who are they've traveled somewhere new, or they have some kind of outsider status. And here, thinking about what is it like to already exist in a community, and to either leave or to stay? And if you stay, what is your relationship with that community, or what does it require of you to stay? What are you gaining or giving up? And I don't know that that's like an obvious part of all the stories, but that there's a short piece called like I'm not even going to be able to come up with any of it, so I won't keep us here as I try to remember. But this sense of sort of like people who stay and people who leave, and exploring different manifestations of that question.
I have a love-hate relationship with the Midwest. I love it here, and yet you go to other places and you realize there are advantages there as well. I won't go too far into that, but do you feel that way, Caitlin?
There's I'm still trying to figure out how to write about it. It does not show up in any of the stories in this book, but it was a real family excursion we took to this small town in Kansas, where my generations of my mom's family were buried. So they had emigrated from different places in Europe. They travel halfway across the country to Nowheresville, Kansas.
Wow.
And I'm also from a series of Nowheresville. I mean that is like not a pejorative.
Yeah, I do feel like that permeates all of your work. That these people who are in the middle of nowhere, kind of, which it felt Midwestern to me.
Yeah, and I was just looking around, being like, why here? Like, why stop here? And so many of them lived and died there, and then there was the generation that that's not where I'm from. That was my mother had left, and her mother had left, and yeah, this question of why do people end up where they end up?
Okay, so well, I had that question about you start with the collective we. I guess the first short question I have is that the way you always wrote it? You started the story with a we, and through every draft, it was in the collective?
Yeah, so Better Not Tell You Now started to give credit to the Kenyon Review Young Writers Workshop. It's a summer program for high school age writers. I was there for a summer as an assistant teacher. I was in a workshop with the instructor David Hall. And one of the prompts that he gave, I think all the instructors gave it on the same afternoon, but I was supposed to write alongside the students. And it was a magical realism prompt, basically. And it was a world where like one thing is different. So not a world with like a whole other magic system or set of rules or just our world, but like one thing is not obeying the rules that we think we know about our world. And just the first idea I had was like, okay, fortune-telling games actually tell the future. They actually work. And I just sort of sat and started writing, and it took no time at all for that to reveal itself as that. I did not see it as a good thing. I didn't think this would be like a pleasant experience. And it was always the collective. It was always a group of friends. I think there would be other ways to tell the story, but that was there from the beginning, and I never discarded it.
That's one thing I just absolutely love about this story is that there's this group of friends, and you capture this time so perfectly. And I've never read anything like this anywhere else, where you're talking about that eagerness that young people, but I think in some ways especially teen girls, they really want to know what's going to happen. How's their life going to be? Is it going to be okay? But they only want to know if it's going to be okay, if it's going to be good, right? They don't want the bad answers. And what you have here are people kind of in this I think of it as a very tender time of they're moving from their dependent past to their independent future, and discovering that doors are shutting for them. Things aren't going to be what they hoped. And that life isn't always possibility. You grow up, oh, well, I can be what I want. I can do what I want. And then life happens, and all of a sudden things aren't what you don't have all those opportunities. And I think this is particularly true of girls and young girls, and having to settle for less. And I was wondering if you could talk through the way you got to that very, again, specific but so true idea. That's so amazing in this story.
Thank you. It was there from the beginning. It was always a group of friends, and they were always the age that they are in the final version. And maybe because I was literally surrounded by high school girls at the time, but it did seem, yeah, sort of truisms about fortune telling. Yeah, nobody ever wants to hear something bad. Even if you think you do, you don't really. And I think it also speaks to, like, how do we even know the questions that we would want to ask? Or are the questions, even if you could get the questions answered, would you even know the right questions? And I guess, calling back to like one of these like truisms about fiction where people say like, oh, desire plus obstacle equals plot. And it can and it does. And like I've talked about that with students. It's not like terrible advice. But it does. What happens? How do we even know our own desires? Or what are the moments when we think we know what we want and that's not what we want, or we're ashamed of what we want, or what we want is bad for us, or just the complexity of that, and this moment in their lives where they're posing all these questions, and the questions themselves even seem to reflect the uncertainty or the fragility of who they are, and yeah, in this moment in their lives.
Do you know your themes when you start, or do you discover them as you go along? Because it sounds like you kind of know your themes, right?
I guess it varies by story. Often I know very little. I mean, really almost nothing. It's there's just like a moment or a scene or like half of a scenario that I just start off with, just keep writing to see where it goes. I think it's E.L. Doctorow said, as I'm writing, like I can only see the road in front of me, as far as, it's like a car driving along a night road. All you can see is what the headlights illuminate. But drive on a little farther, drive on a little farther, and you can get the whole way home that way. And that resonated for me, and I think is true for my process. I never know the ending. I don't necessarily, and I mean what you said with the ending, like at some point you have to ask those hard questions about like, what is the point here? Like, what am I trying to say? What am I saying that hasn't already been said 100 times? And I think with this story, I think the themes showed up early, but not consciously. I really was just like, oh, a mash game, but it comes true. Ha ha ha. Like, and then the story posed the obvious question of like, well, okay, and like, yeah, haha, funny. What are you going to do with this? What do you want the reader to do with this? And then I guess posing that question made the other stuff kind of start flooding in.
Did you map that out with each character? Like, so there are all the characters, Callie has one storyline and all the other characters. Did you think specifically like this character is going to give in to fate and just sort of lose her agency because of the answers that she was given? Or how did each one play out? I'm curious. And did you feel like I can't have too many characters going in the same direction? Or were you philosophically trying to play with all of these different permutations of like fate versus free will? Or were you just riffing? You know what I mean?
Sure. I'd like to say it was sort of character first, but it was fortune-telling games first.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
once I decided that this was the sort of game that I was playing with the story, then I was like, well, okay, MASH. Okay, and then what else? Like what, are we doing tarot? Are we doing magic 8 balls? Are we doing palm reading or tea leaf reading? Or what other forms of divination would they be encountering? Or what are the types of information that those forms of divination could maybe provide? And that because of their age, I wanted it to be things that they would actually play or actually do. So these are things that, yeah, like the apple twisting thing is something we totally did in the cafeteria. And then like he loves me not. I mean, games that yield no real information. I mean, this is not like the next 10 years of your life. This is a letter, and like, what are you going to do with that? And then the tarot reading is the only one that would really yield more than these sort of like bits of information or like prepackaged sayings, which is all, a magic 8 ball gives you. So I think I wanted them playing games that were sort of true to them, to what they would really be doing. And then from there, like, well, what could you know from that? Or what might you think you know from that? And then, trying to give them sort of different ways for those fates to show up in the different girl storylines.
That's awesome. And I also love how the one thing that would give us information we don't get to see. It happens off stage. But it's like yes, no questions, right? Or it's simple words or whatever. And they're these indications, but they also come true. I was wondering, I once heard someone refer to stories like there are different doors you enter into the story, right? You some people enter a setting door, and some people enter a character door, and some people enter more an abstract thematic door or a conflict door. And actually, hardly anyone does enter that conflict door, which is, I think, why we have trouble with conflict. And because we're all dorks, right? We don't like beaten up on the playground, and we don't like conflict. But that's a whole other thing. And then the plot door, right? The story door. I heard a story once. Do you have a particular door you enter into the story, a way that it's not just how you begin the story or how you engage with story, but it's, I think, in some ways, the way that you know the story by the time you're finished writing it is yours and not just an imitation of Lori Moore or whomever you might, admire at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. I like thinking about the doors that way. For me personally, it's different. I think the door that this walked through first was either, I guess we'll call it like a concept door, or another Michigan writer, Andy Mozina. I remember hearing him talk about phenomenon stories. He was sort of referring to them as, some wild thing happens and the story is kind of built around thinking through the implications of that. So there's a few stories in the book are kind of phenomenon stories, like town hibernates through winter. People sealed in a biodome. Fortune-telling games tell the truth. But for me, whatever the initial door is, I need to find the character door. I get impatient with myself if it feels like only gamesmanship, either with the concept or the language or structure. Sometimes I start through the structure door. But like if I'm several pages in and that's still the thing that's still the only hallway I'm walking through, I don't know how to make that story work. Like it's not working for me, so I don't know how to make it work for a reader. So I guess whatever hallway I start down, I'm looking for the first character door I can find. And I'm hoping to find it early, and I walk through that. And then I'm trying to figure out like what are the implications of whatever this concept is for people actually living here in the story.
I feel like the hallmark of a good story is that it has implications for life that are larger than the story itself. And in this story, they want to believe in these divination, modems, but in life, everybody wants to believe in something, right? And if you leave Catholicism or whatever, then you might be looking to astrology or whatever. It's very rare that you don't look to something else. And I was thinking about how the story tells us that, as tempting as that is, it's also so dangerous because you give up your own agency over your life sometimes because you think like, oh, it gives you agency, but it gives you the wrong agency. So I'm just curious, at the end of the story, they have the Ouija board there, and I'm just curious what you were thinking. I guess I'm just asking a larger question about belief and agency and how people who don't have a lot of agency try and grasp that.
I'm thinking specifically there was a tarot card reader that I and some friends encountered at a sort of festival when we were teenagers. And my friends did it, and I did not want to. And I said that it was like, I just said I didn't want to spend the money, which, we didn't have the money, but I was like, no, I just really need the, not worth it to me. But something about it like creeped me out. Like I realized about myself, like I was like, I don't want to go in there and I don't want to hear what she has to say. And I don't like objectively, I don't think she's actually going to be able to predict my future with tarot cards. But there was this sense of, I had a pretty prolonged period where I was very into like Ouija boards and sort of witchy things. And I didn't like, what is the degree to which I thought that those held meaning or the potential for magic or the potential for something beyond what I could perceive. And that's my family were not churchgoers, so maybe this is where I was looking for that. But this is sort of taking you away. Your question was more about agency, but I guess right now I'm thinking about, especially with that last scene there, they don't think that anything's coming to save them here. Like they're not, they know that planchette is not going to move unless one of them moves it. But that sense of wanting reassurance or wanting the future to be this promise that bad things aren't going to happen. And that's what they want so desperately. And like, that's what they're not giving each other in that moment.
They wanted hope, right? You did this so well, Caitlin. You show this like slow degradation of hope in the future for these girls to the end where it's not, a car chase. It's not like the most, externally dramatic thing in the world, but the total loss of hope with these girls, to the point where some don't even show up, right, is very devastating in a way that short stories can sometimes only deliver. I love that ending so much. I've read the story so many times and I've taught it to my students as like, it's such a tightly constructed, engineered story. And the ending, again, it's not like I'm going to punch you in the gut ending, but it does punch you in the gut. It's like a softer, more subtle, oh my God, now I'm devastated and have to go lie down ending that I just love it.
Because you can't feel like there's no way they wouldn't be devastated by the future. Like I couldn't think of another ending you could have given them where there would have been more hope for them, which is sort of sad.
And that's how life is.
Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes, not always, but it slowly humbles you to the point where you where again no one, like, you realize no one's coming to save you. You don't have that superstructure of childhood. Not that saves everybody, but it's supposed to. It's ideally
that magic of childhood. And
right.
Do you have any last questions for Caitlin? Because we are going over, so I should probably.
Of course, we're going over. Okay, I have one more that I have to ask you, and I'm going to ask you this because you're more of an abstract theoretical thinker. I think I've learned about you in this podcast. So short stories. You've written short stories. You've written a novel. Came back to short stories. I'm sure there's more coming up. I hope. I really hope. So you really understand the fiction genre from different sides, and I'm wondering, like, what can short stories do that novels can't do, that other forms can't do? What is in your mind? What is the territory of short stories, and how are they different from other genres in their capabilities?
Okay, that's only like the biggest question. Here for this, it's like a whole podcast built around like deconstructing specific stories. And now you're like, what is the nature of a short story versus
tell me, because I'm trying to figure it out.
I mean, aren't we all? I mean, it's a funny genre because it does happen by default sometimes. Like you're like, oh, this is going to be a novel. And you're like, I do not have that much to say about these people. This is what I got. This is the end of their story. Or it starts life as something else and you end up with a short story. And this is not a super interesting answer, really. But for me, it is. I think it's a relationship with. No, this is already wrong, because I was going to say it was a relationship with like time, that, fiction is sort of centered around like these particular moments. But then certainly there are writers that manage to tackle huge spans of time and very circuitous time, as you do so well in Yuda. The focus on not like the whole of a journey or the whole of a life, but this particular moment where some kind of journey or some stage of a journey has been reached, or there's some kind of realization or shift, maybe in the old-fashioned epiphany sense, maybe not. When those moments land, I think it is just so, as a reader and a writer, that those moments are so satisfying. And again, to take it back to your story, like when we get to the moment with a name at the end, like I literally gasped and then went back and then was like, but, and then I went back and like it was staring me in the face from the end of the first paragraph. It was right there. But I just didn't put it together. And that sense of surprise and inevitability. And obviously like a novel can have that, but like when that relationship between the surprise and inevitability in these really like focused moments from a life are something that I really love in a good short story. And I'm curious about your answers to this because that's a very hard question.
Oh, I asked you because I don't know. What about you, Kelly? You're doing the podcast, you know.
No, I don't. I have no idea. I know that ever since I was young, and sadly, I'm very sad about what happened with Alice Munro, and that's changed everything for me, unfortunately. But at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, you can create this entire little, world in a short story that is so poignant. And I think what Caitlin's saying is the heart of it, that you have that element of surprise that there's something about the brevity of the story that heightens that surprise element that I don't know that I've seen done in a novel. I mean, a novel, I feel like they become my friends or antagonists or whatever, and you're with them through all these different things. But there's not that final moment, like in Cathedral, where you're just like, oh my God, what the heck?
By the way, I have an antidote for Alice Munro.
Oh, good.
I've been getting into Mavis Gallant. Do you read her?
I've been meaning to.
It's like better than.
Oh, yay. Thank you.
So, yeah, and it's the same kind of thing, and they're both Canadian. And
yay. And aren't there like 90 stories or something in the New Yorker of Mavis Gallant? Okay.
Just like the most famous person you've never heard of. But,
right.
But yeah, so I've been reading her, and I'm like, oh, who needs mean old Alice?
Yeah,
when I've got her better.
Yay. Oh, thank you so much. I needed an alternative. That's so great. Thank you so much, you guys. This has been wonderful. And I really, really appreciate you being on here.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks so much for having us. And it's such a pleasure to talk with Caitlin, with whom I've only emailed. And it's wonderful to see your face.
Yeah. Okay.
Likewise. Thank you both so much for doing this.
Okay, thanks. Thank you again for joining us. It means a lot to me. And if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to let us know, give us some stars, give us some love, or a small donation. Anything is appreciated. The next person who will be on the podcast is Eli Sparkman. He is one of the co-owners of Book Suey in Hamtramck, Michigan. And we will be talking about his 5 flash fiction pieces on June 15th.